Hello, friends. We are here. Way too early Friday morning. But we're here. We're talking. We got a big mug of coffee from Dan Devine. I'm just jumping the gun. He's your man. He's everyone's man. He's my man.
Do you want to run that back, Jake?
No, I think this is the energy I want to start this with.
Dynamite.
It's a very early Friday morning here in Brooklyn. But we are here to record another edition of No Cap Room on the Ball Don't Lie Podcast Network. My name is Jake Fischer. I'm the senior NBA reporter at Yahoo Sports. And Dan wrote a late night column. I wrote a late night fixins thing that I wasn't exactly expecting to be waiting for cap projections from someone from, and getting more and more details from Jordan Poole to Washington. But here we are. That's what this week's about. That's what the final grind is about. My eyes, as I'm looking at us, I can't keep them open. But this is the NBA world doesn't stop. We need to put some audio content in our listeners' ears. And who better to do it with than the man who wrote probably 18,000 words in his winners and losers column last night? Dan Devine, how are you? What's up?
I'm good. I think I came in under 3K. So, light work, nice and easy. It's all happening, man. I don't think that the draft unfolded in a really shocking way, but there's still all of the movement that went into it still leaves a lot to unpack. So we had the opportunity to do it late last night, but we both had to write. So we decided to do it early this morning. And I think that we're both paying for that decision today, but we're going to make it worth your while, everybody. Let's go.
Let's go. Yeah. All right. Sorry to be low energy. I just wanted to get everyone to maybe have some sympathy, maybe have some little empathetic listen here.
I think, Jake, we're
providing a service.
Let's pull back the curtain a little bit. I think what you're doing is it's like any sort of couple dynamic. You can't both be in the same place at once. It's really a teeter-totter seesaw type situation. You saw me come onto Zoom with, let's say, negative energy, and you decided that you needed to go to the low end to force me to raise up. And so that's under penalty of bad episode, camera catching both of us, I now have to sort of lift up. So I think it was canny hosting by you. It was emotionally manipulative, which I don't appreciate, but it's put me in a position to try to deliver at a higher level. So maybe it was a good call all the way around.
There you go. All right, let's get to it because we don't want to take too much time of your time or ours. So Porzingis trade to Boston is probably the newsiest, buzziest thing in terms of the fact that the deal fell apart first. We'll get to that in a second. Just want to also touch on the fact that if anyone listening is sitting here shouting, the Warriors traded Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. I get it. That's a huge, huge trade as well. I think it has big ramifications, or at least is the tip of an iceberg that we're starting to see around the league with trades in terms of cost cutting that I believe to be coming here before the league calendar flips next week, and maybe some other, lingering trade opportunities as we get into the free agent market on June 30th. But for now, A, because he's 7'3", B, because it's a real contending team that came this close being my little distance between my thumb and my index finger for those not watching on YouTube. They came that close from making the NBA Finals after doing it a year ago, and the Celtics have been characterized since February as aggressive in trying to find someone like Kristaps Porzingis. There aren't many 7'3" hot shooting rim protectors out there, but by someone I mean a real threat to be Boston's best front court player in a championship run, knowing that Robert Williams has, of course, had his share of injury history, and that Al Horford, while he suddenly emerged as the Joel Embiid kryptonite once again this postseason, you're not going to be able to count on Al Horford forever, just like the Lakers are not expecting to have LeBron James around for the next 5 years. So it comes at a
slight difference. All time historical, etc. I know, Al Horford, you can appreciate him all you want, but yes, you're right. Making the plans surrounding that 38-ish year old mainstay. Yes, you got to have a contingency plan.
So It comes at the cost of Marcus Smart, which is an emotional subject for many people in the general region of New England, including one, Ben Rohrbach, senior NBA writer at Yahoo Sports, who put together a nice kind of feelsy story about that aspect of this game and the sport and the human element involved in what ultimately is a brutal competition that is about taxes and finance and bloodthirst for a real contending consideration for certain teams. Other teams are just like, hey, let's duck the tax, let's hang out, let's make a couple gate revenue things. But when you're a team like Boston and you have the expectation to be competing for banners every single year, these are the types of moves you have to make. So I'll just start off this broadly before we start to talk about other aspects of this. But Dan, aside from the gut-wrenching aspect of Marcus Smart no longer being a Boston Celtic, what's your general sense on if you think Boston got better as we sit here recording Friday before from here, and then when the reports, Brian Robb at Mass Live, I think first wrote it, I put some details out about they were looking at Malcolm Brogdon and Marcus Smart trades all around the league, and it ended up the Brogdon deal falls apart with medical, and Marcus Smart has to go out the door.
Yeah, the fact that so the two things I thought about immediately were obviously all the reporting in advance and the numbers game suggested Boston was going to have to undo the logjam, get rid of one guard at least, right? Because you're rostering Smart and Brogdon and Derek White took on a huge role, made all NBA for all defense first team. And then you've got Peyton Pritchard saying he wants a trade because there just aren't minutes for him and opportunity there. So at some point, something was going to have to alleviate that. The fact that it went from the Brogdon deal disappearing to the Smart deal showing up in like an hour and a half indicates that's a conversation that had been ongoing, or that Memphis and Boston had that kind of conversation before. And it's not a shock that Marcus Smart has been in trade talks before. That salary slot has sort of always been the most movable piece of what the Celtics had to work with. So that it came together quickly is a reminder to some degree of this is an always going discussion for a lot of guys. And the teams, you've mentioned it before a lot of times, the conversations don't stop at the trade deadline and then get put in a folder and never recovered. The conversations continue, or they just they get quieter and they come back up 5 months later, right? Or 4 months later. As far as what it did for them on the court, I understand this is one of those on paper versus on the court, in reality, potential divides or schisms there. On paper, Kristaps Porzingis is a higher end offensive player than Marcus Smart. He is I think he averaged 23 points a game last season.
Borderline all-star form when healthy, when things were going right in Washington. That's how he played last season.
Yeah, the advanced stats on him were fantastic. I think he was top 20 in estimated plus minus, top 30 in real plus minus. The regularized adjusted plus minus. Love the impact that he had in Washington. Some of that is dependent on who else is on the court with you, who's coming, your on court, off court numbers, and who's coming in behind you, the stuff like that. So, but he, by any sort of reckoning, he had a great season. It was more of if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear the sound? Because nobody was really paying attention to the Wizards last year, but that there's a 27-year-old, stretch five who can play with other fives if you need him to, has become a really good rim protector as a drop defender. There's a lot to like in Kristaps Porzingis. And you can make the argument that as a third option behind Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, he elevates that Celtics offense and adds more variety to it. Suddenly, you can play more pick and pop. You can play more pick and roll. You kind of have a three-headed big man rotation that you can mix and match. He offers the stretch of Al Horford with the rim running and shot blocking of Robert Williams III. So you could theoretically play two of all of those three together at any one time. You could also, in the same way that Boston was so effective, often going with Al Horford going 5 out last year as the lone big, Porzingis, you can theoretically do that too. The numbers on those lineups defensively throughout Porzingis' career have not been great, but he's also never going to he will be surrounded by better wing defensive talent than he has at any point in his career. So maybe those lineups hold up better with better perimeter defenders around him. There's an argument why this rebalances their roster in a way that makes more sense, especially given this, the financial outlay between the guard position and the bigs. I get that. And, you talked about Ben writing a feelsy thing. I kind of have a hard time believing from a vibes perspective that swapping Marcus Smart for a guy, the longest tenured player on your team, the guy who has been the driving force of 9 straight playoff runs, 5 runs to the Eastern Conference Finals in terms of, and like he is the reason that he was the reason that they were an elite defensive team, because as much as Robert Williams is a great defensive find, as much as Tatum and Brown are great defensive wings, they can switch everything because of Marcus Smart, because Marcus Smart can go guard, Chris Paul, and he can go guard Kristaps Porzingis in the post. There aren't a whole lot of guys like that. And maybe he's not the same guy anymore. That seems to be baked into Boston's calculation after all the miles on him for, he's about to turn 30. All those hard hits over the years, all those defensive mismatches that he's had to play up against. Maybe they're saying we're getting out a year too early as opposed to a year too late, sort of a Belichick on the Patriots type of deal. Maybe that winds up being valid, but I believe something will have been lost in translation here. And I don't think that it will require a change in the leadership structure and a change in the energy in Boston to see who will sort of rise up to fill that role. Maybe Tatum and Brown are ready for that. Maybe this is like the young guys aren't young guys anymore. They're full-fledged veterans about to make like $600 million combined. It's time for them to just like fully take the reins. But I'm a little skeptical this is going to be clean. And this is going to like that the plus minus kind of numbers suggesting that this is going to like level them up and make them an even heavier favorite to win the championship doesn't quite smell right to me. And maybe that's just like sort of hokey old nonsense from, an old man who's tired. But I kind of don't. I feel like there's something that you're losing when you lose a guy like Marcus Smart.
For sure. And he's been the like emotional leader of that locker room forever. I think maybe the fact that this offseason in Boston was supposed to have a general theme of change and restructuring and realizing we're close, but we're still pretty far. We got some things we got to do. We're going to have a massive overhaul of our coaching staff, partially by our decision making, partially by Ime Udoka having a little bit of a brain drain of the staff that he brought there. Right. And look, like maybe this is an addition by subtraction. I'm not here saying that Smart was like a malcontent and an issue in that locker room. Right. But when you do have someone who has been such an established voice, heart and soul type figure, and he's not one of the two leading players that needs to put the team on the shoulder moving forward to compete for a championship year after year, and that's not necessarily necessary. Steph Curry's not, the loudest voice in the room. Draymond Green was in Golden State. But I just think it presents an interesting opportunity for a culture shift that could be beneficial. Maybe, the identity is more reflective of what Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are together as opposed to what Marcus Smart is, which could, I don't know. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but
no, it does. I think that they're right. I'm presenting maybe like the pessimistic view of what that kind of change could be, like that something will be lost in translation, and you're presenting the glass half full side of it, which is like any sort of change like that presents the opportunity for growth and for a shift into it's not a crisis. It's like sort of an opportunity for things to look a little bit different and reimagine what that power structure, what that dynamic looks like, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But that, and so I think that that's fair. That said, I think what we're talking about, what Smart brings is like an absolute hand in glove fit for what
huge.
the Memphis Grizzlies need at this point. You're coming off, and I hesitate to even say like what they have been, what they've been through, because they're still very much going through it, right? Like Ja Morant's not going to be there for 25 games. You're working through injuries to really important players. You're going to work through the absence of Dillon Brooks, who's been a long time kind of a core member of that organization's rise. But you needed somebody to sort of fill in the gap on the 25 games that Ja's going to be out. And you needed somebody to fill in the gap for Brooks as a lead perimeter defender. And you needed another adult in the room, for lack of a better term, somebody who walks into the locker room with enough playoff, experience, enough accomplishments and achievements, enough sort of respect in the game to be able to, bend the ears of young guys who maybe could use some of that. One of my first thoughts on this, and I'm sure it's not an original thought because I think a lot of people reached the same immediate conclusion, was like, this is the most Grizzlies guy that's never been a Grizzly ever. And I was talking yesterday to Jeff Calkins, great Memphis columnist, on his radio show, and he said, like, it made me think, like, is that who the Grizzlies are anymore? Because obviously the identity has somewhat shifted from grit and grind to this younger next generation, and the idea that maybe a little bit of the old stuff is not. You could use some of that, given the speed with which everything has shifted. Maybe hasn't necessarily always been the best thing organizationally. So Smart comes in. He sort of checks all of those boxes at the same time. I think Sirat Sohi, formerly of Yahoo Sports, now of The Ringer, had said he's basically Dillon Brooks who goes to therapy. I don't know if that's totally fair, but I get the premise. Like he provides the perimeter defense. He's a much better playmaker to add another like plus passer into the offense. He's not going to take quite as many insane shots. And he brings a level of seriousness that frankly Dillon Brooks did not, and that nobody else on the Grizzlies is able to really replicate. So yeah. It cost him a bunch, though. Those two picks, number 25 in Thursday's draft, and then also the top 4 protected Golden State Warriors pick next year in the 2024 draft. But you get chips like the Warriors pick to go make moves of consequence midstream, and I think that's what this was.
Yeah, you mentioned the Golden State Warriors 2024 pick. Not expecting that pick to be anything, below the 20s. They picked Golden State was 19th this year, so it's probably the highest range, barring a doomsday scenario that I think can expect for Golden State, being that their move for a Chris Paul, which absolutely has salary benefits, and I think from my conversations and as I wrote late night at Yahoo Sports, I think that was a massive element of their calculus to get Chris Paul, being that he's got $30 million non-guaranteed next year.
I was going to say more about the why on that, because I think people might not really be grasping quite why that's a big deal. Like, well, but he makes a ton of money.
We're going to get into that. So the Golden State Warriors are already at $190 million in projected salary cap from a cap guy I was talking to late last night, before even bringing back Draymond Green.
Right.
The second apron is set at, I believe, $186 million. So they're going to be over the second apron right now. And they could be more cost moves coming. I don't necessarily think so. I haven't heard that. If it's something like the Warriors end up moving Jonathan Kuminga for like future picks in the coming weeks, like I wouldn't be surprised. They definitely had conversations about him this week and last night. But the fact that Chris Paul's entire 2024, 2025, so next season, not this next season, the next season, is completely non-guaranteed. Similar thing to this year where there's a guarantee date, and any activity happening before that, he could get waived and have relief on a team's official books. That's even better next season from a team perspective, because $15 million isn't guaranteed. The whole thing is hanging in the balance. And I can sit here on Friday, June 23rd, 2023, and almost guarantee you that by Friday, June 23rd, 2024, Chris Paul's option will not be picked up at $30 million.
Right.
I also didn't think any contending team was going to want to pay him that money, but the contending team that decided to do so did it to be able to get off 4 years, $128 million for Jordan Poole, which a lot of Warriors fans and Twitter people can kind of poke and pry and make fun of Jordan Poole for his decision making that leads to some questionable things and getting pulled in postseason opportunities and what have you. But the guy was Golden State's third most consistent scoring weapon in the NBA Finals a year ago, to the point that he commanded a 4-year contract worth $30 million in average annual salary. Still super young. I think he's 24 off the top of my head. And when the Warriors gave that money to him last year, I know part of that calculus was, well, if we don't extend him now and you let him get to restricted free agency this summer, there's a chance that a rebuilding team like Washington now, might want to throw him a massive bag even bigger than this to try to see if he could become their own like pseudo version of Trae Young, which like, I'm not saying that's where things are heading with the Wizards at all, but Jordan Poole is going to have the opportunity to play like Trae Young and with the Wizards with, a giant vacuum of Bradley Beal out the door and Kristaps Porzingis out the door and Kyle Kuzma opting out. And I'd be surprised if he goes back to Washington with everything we're hearing at this point. So sure, Chris Paul and his veteran know-how and the fact that he's had so many postseason battles with the Warriors, it's very interesting that he's the latest, rival turned ally in the Warriors' ongoing quest to win championships. The first one, to me, people forget, is Andre Iguodala coming from that Denver team that Golden State upset in the first round.
Yeah, he got an up-close and personal look at the future and said, let me get on board for that. He was an early angel investor.
For sure. And then, the biggest, most noteworthy is obviously Kevin Durant, after having a 3-1 lead in the Western Conference Finals against Golden State, losing that, then Golden State losing their own 3-1 lead to Cleveland in the finals, and then Draymond's texting Kevin in his car and says, come on board, and KD says, yeah, sure, why not? So 2 titles later, a title after the Warriors, reemerge and beat Boston last year. It's just interesting to me also, like, there wasn't a ton of conversation on Jordan Poole from everything I've heard. I know the Spurs called and checked in on him. It's a little weird to me, the details. I still kind of need to learn more. I want to hear it from the Celtics side of things. There was some Jordan Poole Boston conversations when the Celtics were calling around and offering Brogdon and Smart and checking what pathways they had to turn those contracts into something better. So for now, I'm just going to ask you, Dan, what is the upside of CP3 as a player in Golden State now that we've gotten all of the accounting and the intel out of the way?
Yeah. First thing, just as you talked about Jordan Poole being, moving into that new opportunity or role in Washington. It's worth remembering, 43 games as a starter last year, he averaged 24.6 points per game in 33 minutes a game. So like usage up over 30%, true shooting over league average, 578 true shooting. Like given the opportunity to be a number one guy, whenever he's sort of stepped into that Steph Light role, he's produced like gangbusters. So I know our guy Mark Spears, my old homie from Yahoo Sports, had said he's putting putting his sort of chips behind Poole leading the league in scoring next year. I might slow my roll, Mr. Spears, on that, but it's you get the thought process. Usage, opportunity. He's going to put up a ton of buckets, and they're going to need
target him
points.
in fantasy.
Yeah, right. That maybe do that more than go to your local sports book and plunk down a bet on him. Although I guess the odds would probably be good. I don't know. That's not my particular area of expertise. Chris Paul on the Warriors. There's part of me that's like, maybe Joe Lacob decided he was willing to spend even more money just to troll at that point. Like, we're going to put you, you're going to be up on our wall as like, not only the head that we've got from the Hunt in Houston all those years ago, and from the Clippers the years before that, but now you belong to us in a different way, and we'll pay for that. That's okay. We'll pay a premium for that. What he can be for them on the court is potentially a higher end answer to what you do when Steph Curry's off the court than they've had since, I don't know, like the best of Sean Livingston, or I mean, obviously, Durant is the answer to that, but like in terms of just like an actual point guard to operate and run the show. that's been a perpetual source of pain and issues because there's no replicating Stephen Curry as the system. Jordan Poole got kind of close at times, but even that was not always a successful formula for them. If you are a Warriors fan who's been looking for more pick and roll out of Steve Kerr's offense, I got good news for you. I bet he's going to run a bunch of that with Chris Paul, because I don't know that Chris Paul is going to allow much different than that. The concern, and Chris Paul he's getting up there in age, he has lost a step. He's still like a pain in the neck defender. He is one of the smartest players that's ever taken the floor. In terms of raising the team's
best, he's also not going to guard Steph at all in a playoff series.
You don't have to worry about him playing Twister. That's pretty good.
Yeah, there you go.
Or try to punch him in the groin or something like that. Yeah, you don't have to worry about some of those other things that you'd have, like other occupational hazards that come with playing Chris Paul. Shouts out to Julius Hodge, but I think what it does, I'm skeptical about, there was the graphics that kind of go up, the social graphics that are like new starting five ? And it's like 4 guards and Draymond. I'm like, I don't think they're going to do that. I would, but I mean, the idea that Chris Paul becomes like the most overqualified backup point guard in league history is kind of wild, but the potential for elevating the non-Steph minutes and putting in a lower usage, lower minutes role, the idea that maybe his shooting efficiency rises back up to be, where it was a couple of years ago in Phoenix before it kind of tailed off last year. That's an interesting possibility. And one of the biggest thing that it said to me is this is, and obviously just from a literal, they've moved on from player standpoint, they draft Poole and they invest in him. They draft James Wiseman, number 2 overall. Kuminga's there. And obviously, as you mentioned, there's a lot of discussion about Kuminga potentially being on the move. Moses Moody is there. The 2 timelines plan is over. And
if the process is dead, the 2 timeline plan
right.
is over.
And the goal, it certainly appears, is we are going to get guys who understand how to play the way that we want to play and who are smart and seasoned and experienced, and we don't have to wait to get up to speed. Chris Paul might not be a natural hand and glove fit for the Warriors style that Steve Kerr has preferred, but he's damn sure smart enough to pick it up and to figure out how to get in where he fits into it. So you lean more in that direction. It's why, when people were sort of wondering at the draft, are they going to go out and get young bigs? It's like, young bigs can't really play in Golden State, and we've got years of evidence that suggests that. They picked Trace Jackson Davis out of Indiana. People suggest that he's like a perfect fit for the Warriors style. TBD on that. Also, an older rookie that's going to come in with a lot of experience maybe fits a little more neatly. Chris Paul is who you get if you want to become, lean back into that. We employ, in addition to Draymond and Steph and Clay, Iguodala and Livingston and these sort of David West, these smart, really sort of genius level veteran basketball players. When the young guys can come after our stars leave, this is who we need now to get the rest of the juice out of the squeeze.
There you go. All right, we're going to take a quick break, come back, and go over some winners and losers.
Talk about the draft on our draft recap
last
episode.
Night's NBA draft. Yeah, stay with us. All right, we're back. Last night, NBA draft. It happened, aside from all the trades. And honestly, I think by the end of it, and people, as I'm texting around the league, who do you think's going where, blah, 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 blah. You are kind of tweaking it. This is why I feel indebted that I don't, not indebted, grateful that I don't have to put out a mock draft publicly. But I am trying to figure it out and I'm making my spreadsheet to keep track of it all today. So
that's like a Patreon subscriber content idea for you. See if you can get people to pay for your secret spreadsheet.
Maybe. But all that's to say, come Thursday, late afternoon, seemed pretty clear the top 5 was set. That it was Victor Wembanyama, Brandon Miller at 2 to the Charlotte Hornets, Scoot Henderson at 3 to the Blazers. The Houston Rockets take the first of the identical twins from Overtime Elite, Amen Thompson. The Pistons take Asar Thompson at 5. There's some back and forth, let's say, in the NBA reporting community about what was going on in Charlotte. I was certainly of the mind that Brandon Miller was the leader in the clubhouse all along. I did think, and I do believe that there was some, at least, chicanery coming from the Hornets side of things on Thursday morning, where I got text from Houston at 4. I was talking to people on both sides of the Brandon Miller camp and the Scoot Henderson camp who were being told from Charlotte that their pick was not decided yet, which, as I tweeted, reminded me a lot because I wrote about this in my book, where in 2015, Mitch Kupchak, the GM of the Hornets, was then the GM of the Lakers, did not tell D'Angelo Russell or Jahlil Okafor and their people who they were picking, to the point where Bill Duffy, who was representing Jahlil Okafor at the time, one of the most powerful, respected agents in the game, and Aaron Mintz, a very well-known agent from CAA, both of them were looking at each other, shrugging at number 2 on the clock that year because Mitch Kupchak and the Lakers wouldn't tell them. And even after the Victor pick was on the clock and called out, I texted someone from Scoot's camp and they said, Charlotte won't tell us yet. So that's just a little peek behind the curtain at the type of misdirections and information secrecy and all that type of stuff that happens here. But let's just jump in quickly and start talking about some draft night winners and losers. And the first one I just want to point out, because I'm certainly biased, is twins. We've got the Thompson twins, like we talked about, going back-to-back 4 and 5. And it is just absolutely crazy when you think about the mathematics of the even odds of twins coming into existence, let alone identical twins. The fact there are so many twins in the NBA, from Caleb and Cody Martin, obviously Caleb having more of a dent in the postseason picture of late. This draft alone, just like a man and a star. Then Taylor Hendricks, who went 9th to the Utah Jazz, he's got a twin brother. Keegan Murray's twin brother, Chris Murray, got drafted 23rd to Portland. Kristen Peak, our amazing draft analyst who knows every single player and their mothers and their grandmothers, she's a twin. And your boy's a twin too. So just a great night for twins. Breakfast taco shout outs from Victor Wembanyama, which I've been saying this. I wrote about it at Yahoo since I went to the whole Victor Scoot Bowl back in October. Like, I think the clip of him like reaching enlightenment on the JJ Redick podcast, I've seen plenty now. The guy is just an elite of a mind and a spirit as he is a basketball player. And I just want the world and our American listeners, who are maybe not as globally cultured as I am.
Jeez, Jake.
This dude is about to be like, and all the questions about Ja Morant, like being the face of the league and blah, blah, blah. And like, oh, is it a problem that there's international players all over the place and we don't have our homegrown American son leading this league into this post-LeBron Steph era? Victor Wembanyama, if he stays healthy, is going to be like a modern day Socrates mixed with like with like a youth with the energy of being a TikTok star and like so open and genuine with the public. It's just mind-blowing that this guy exists and is so good in every area of the board. I just wanted to say that. You're laughing at everything I'm saying, so feel free to rebut whatever I just...
Loser of the draft is Jake Fisher saying globally cultured on our podcast. You really worked to pronounce that way.
I did.
I would say...
We're performing here. I want a microphone and camera. What do you want from me?
That's true. But our producer John Gennaro notes Wemby is like a modern day Socrates mixed with a TikTok star. Also, something that you'd put on the movie poster. Maybe hopefully it'll be the first line of his Hall of Fame bio,
which I intend to write.
You tend to write those, yes. I would say, Victor Wembanyama saying that when they asked, like, what are you excited about in San Antonio? And he says breakfast tacos. Nailed it. Perfect answer. As you said, he seemed, there is the ease and comfort of like, I've been ready for this. This is like, I understand who I am and what I'm capable of. He said there was in the I think it was ESPN interview on the draft site or on site at the draft. Something to the effect of like, my journey is unique because I have a unique body and I understand how I need to work as a result of it. But I think he also understands the opportunity that is a result of it. Like there have not been very many people in the history of humanity that are this big, this long, and have that skill set. So And that's why all the hype is as towering as it has been. And I wrote earlier this week, just like trying to level set a little bit. It is possible that he is the best prospect we've seen in 20 odd years. He also is like, what are expectations? What are reasonable expectations for him? The last two Spurs centers that went number one overall.
Of the new free world. That's my expectation for Victor.
It certainly sounds like it. I mean, if nothing else, he's following in the footsteps of globally cultured persons like David Robinson and Tim Duncan, who brought their own international experiences to the forefront when they came to the NBA level. But
which I don't want to. I should not say this. But very, very quickly.
Great start.
Just how hand in glove the fit of Victor Wembanyama is with the Spurs culturally and in the history of the league. I have been absolutely floored how many people who are smart and have been doing this, like agents and team people who are like in the NBA, who are kind of raising an eye at how hand in glove a fit Victor Wembanyama happening to land with Victor Wembanyama in the lottery is. That's just been something that I can't believe how many grown people are truly banging the conspiracy drum, but there you go.
Well, it's one of the people's favorite things about the NBA is occasionally believing in frozen envelopes and, weighted ping pong balls or whatever. Like I understand. You've been in the room. You've seen all the reasons why it's not true. People don't want to believe that it's not true because they want to believe the better story. And that's the better story in this case. And Wembanyama is going to provide an awful lot of those, it seems like, over the years, starting, I guess, with his first trip to a breakfast taco joint when he gets down to Texas. Loser of the draft. I didn't write this in the column last night because I think there's going to wind up being something separate on it on the site maybe today. You mentioned the Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson selection at number 2. Mitch Kupchak's answer to the question of like why they went with Brandon at 2, or if what made them comfortable with that with Brandon Miller at 2. You kind of have to watch the video to get the cadence of it. But here's the quote. Well, everything that every answer we got to every question. I'd say he's a freshman, right? So, he's a little bit, I'd say younger than, excuse me, I wouldn't say younger. I better not even go in that direction, actually. I'll just back off. So if that's the answer to what made you feel comfortable about picking that guy number 2, I would sure as hell hate to hear what you didn't like about it. Yeah. Brandon Miller wins the bake-off with Scoot to go number 2, and he doesn't wind up having to pay some kind of penalty for talking out the side of his mouth about Michael Jordan not being his GOAT because Paul George is his GOAT. And that's a good thing for him.
I think from things I've heard about Michael Jordan, that might have helped his case. MJ would have been like,
that's entirely
this guy's
possible.
Talking shit, man. Get him on my squad. Get my last pick.
That's certainly possible. But and it is. I'm like, listen, I don't claim to be a prospect evaluator of any repute. I follow. I'm like after the finals end, I'm mainlining this stuff like everybody else who doesn't watch much college basketball. But maybe there isn't a dramatic difference in terms of overall talent level or ceiling or whatever between Miller and Scoot. All things equal, taking the 6'9", shot creating wing over the 6'2" point guard makes a ton of sense to me. But make that argument. Make the not the sort of stammering. He's younger. He's maybe not younger. I don't actually know. Let's just back off and not even talk about what made us feel comfortable. That does not engender a whole lot of confidence, I would imagine, in the Hornets moving forward. That said, there's something to feel good about in terms of being able to build with LaMelo and Brandon Miller, and we'll see what happens with Miles Bridges and PJ Washington's there. Like there are some pieces in Charlotte to be excited about. You just maybe would prefer a better on-ramp than Mitch Kupchak provided after the draft last night.
Let's just keep this moving here. With the winners, I see Grady Dick's memorable outfit, which I know you liked. So 30-second answer about why you were so high on the bedazzled red jacket.
It spilled. Well, I wasn't high on the actual jacket. I think I think that it was. It made him look like there were so many great comparisons to what he looked like. One of them I thought I really loved was Bobby the Brain Heenan, famed 1980s wrestling manager. But the confidence you have to have in yourself and the unbotheredness that you have to have in yourself to make that kind of sartorial decision. You got to believe it's going to make you feel, you're not going to feel too shaken in the late stages of a big game. Maybe never. He had said in an interview, it's a once in a lifetime thing. Let's make sure of that. Let's not bring that one back out for anything. But the confidence that leads you to make that decision seems like it'll serve the Raptors in good stead.
Yeah. I think To your point, I have not digested hours of film of these prospects, but from the word I've gotten from my friends in the scouting community and just looking at things from a value add perspective, the Mavericks are produced for John Gennaro's Mavericks, not ironically like my Bulls. He's a Mavericks fan. The Mavericks come with Derek Lively at number 12, who I said it on Chris Peak's On the Clock show on Wednesday that I was doubtful he was actually the guy. They were just so loud. Sometimes it's hard to sift through the noise, and when a name is so loud, so early on, it just kind of seems off. But he was clearly their guy. There's been Tyson Chandler comparisons to him. The Mavericks are certainly looking for ways to offload JaVale McGee's salary, and they didn't really have a long marriage with Christian Wood, so trying to find a cost-effective rim protector who can truly elevate a defense behind Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, that's what his calling card is. I think is considered a massive win by sliding down 2 spots and being able to offload Davis Bertans' contract, which in the process gave you space to take on Richaun Holmes' contract from Sacramento, who still could be a very serviceable player. He really fell out of Mike Brown's rotation in Sacramento, but from the jump, like Chimezie Metu was on Team Nigeria that Mike Brown coached, and I think there was just a move there all along to try to like get the culture building from training camp, and Mike Brown had worked with him and worked with Metu and wanted to see a certain type of effort or something. I'm not saying I just say this, like Richaun Holmes has a lot to offer Dallas, and Dallas clearly agrees. Plus they pick up Omax Prosper from Marquette in the process, who, like, honestly, I went to the green room thing. We talked about it with KP. Like, he was the most magnetic personality, biggest smile, like truly a good kid who I think any locker room will benefit from that was there. So I think that's a huge win for Dallas coming into the night, where they tank and kind of are an eyesore a bit around the league, depending on your perspective of what they did. And they come away with this rookie center who they think can start for them in theory. Another rookie piece, Richaun Holmes. It's a good night for Dallas.
Yeah, the other thing that moving off of the Bertans contract does is it gets them under the luxury tax line, which then opens them up to be able to have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception into using free agency as opposed to the tax mid-level. So, which I think is what's 12.2 million thereabouts is the non-taxpayer mid-level. So it's like 5 million more or so than the mini one.
I think it's like 5 point. Yeah, it's.
Oh, sorry, I maybe transposed them.
It's a big enough number. It's a big enough number.
So 12.2 million to play with in the marketplace. You might be able to get a low end starter on that. You might be, or if nothing else, and a legit rotation piece. So they went into this offseason. Obviously, everybody in the world knew when they made the trade to move off of Dorian Finney-Smith and everything else to bring in Kyrie Irving, they were going to be small, they were going to be bad defensively, and they were going to need help. Their bigs were not rebounders. Their bigs were not shot blockers. They had no big wings after trading DFS. Prosper perhaps fills that role, or certainly he looks the part, and that's like what he's sort of profiled as coming out of Marquette. You completely revamp your center rotation. See what happens with Maxi Kleber. See what happens with Dwight Powell. But there's an infusion of new blood there. You can move past the Wood and JaVale situation, and you set yourself up to have the financial flexibility to bring back Kyrie and add another piece and bring find other ways to revamp a roster with fairly limited resources. So yeah, I thought it was a really slick night from Dallas's front office. Obviously, a lot's going to depend on what whether they're able to bring back Kyrie and at what number, and what they do with that mid level. But they didn't have too many arrows in the quiver, and I think they used the ones that they had really, really well.
Last thing in the winners column, just the scouting community is saying very good things about the Jazz, and that they take UCF forward Taylor Hendricks at 9, Keontae George at 16, who was definitely being talked about in the late lottery, and Bryce Sensabaugh with the 28th pick. The Jazz were fielding so much trade activity. Honestly, the most rumors I got at between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. yesterday were about different possibilities for the Jazz at 28. But the underlining context and all of it was, if there's someone there at 28 they like, they're not doing it. Clearly, Sensabaugh, someone they liked. We got one more thing I want to hit before we get out of here, and it's the fact that there's like a dichotomy here in the winners and losers of things, where the Rockets certainly seem to be a winner, taking Amen Thompson at 4, and getting Cam Whitmore all the way down at 20, who they were said to be considering behind Amen Thompson at 4. So, but for sheer value, would seem to be the absolute clear winners in that regard of the night. But Cam Whitmore is certainly a loser. I when I was milling around he's not a loser. I feel
right.
I have empathy for Cam Whitmore here.
In the context of there being like people who had a good night and people who did not have a good night.
Yes. It was also cute. So my girlfriend has been receiving many clandestine shout outs as I try to personalize myself but not reveal her identity to the public. Watching the draft with me, very taken by how emotional of an evening this was. The word cute and sweet kept being mentioned, but also with Cam Whitmore, I was trying to like kind of illustrate to her how tough it was. The kid lost $12 million, if my calculations are correct, in guaranteed money over the 3-year rookie deal. Which he gained 8, but he lost 12. So that's a tough loss. I mean, just the context it's been very much out there, I think, at this point, but a lot of teams medically red flagged some lower body stuff. He had a knee thing and a foot thing from when he was like in 8th and 9th grade. And I got breakfast with someone in his representation earlier this week. Everyone came into New York, and like the fact that what you do as a 15-year-old in like playing AAU can ultimately have an impact on things. Sometimes this stuff doesn't mean anything, sometimes it does. Like Denzel Valentine, for the draft nerds out there, the NBA veterans out there, was super, super, super talented at Michigan State, was a lottery talent, but he had very troubling knees, according to medical examiners, and like his knee issues did not lead to a long NBA career. So this stuff is important. If he can be healthy, he had the quote I saw was kind of silly, like, "It's my body. I think I'm fine." I mean, I'm rooting for Cam Whitmore though, because like Kevon Looney fell to Golden State, for example, at 30th many years ago, and a lot of that was due to a hip thing, if I recall correctly. And he's ended up having a tremendous, tremendous career that we have certainly stand here on No Cap Room. So any last thoughts there, Dan, before we get out of here?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it seems like that happens almost every year. There's somebody who is a highly touted prospect that seems to sort of fall every year. And, sometimes it winds up coming to nothing. Michael Porter Jr. is another great example. A guy who was like the number 1 player coming out of his high school class, has the back issues at Missouri, and then falls to 14, but into a perfect spot, perfect landing space, and then winds up blossoming on sort of his own timetable, becomes a key part of a championship team, right? Then the hope for Cam Whitmore and for the Rockets is that you have a similar sort of trajectory, a guy who obviously has the pedigree, obviously has the talent and the physicality and the skill set and everything else, and you're able to put him into an environment where they're able to get the most out of him, and that this becomes sort of fuel for whatever reimagining of his game or redoubling of his efforts on the work or anything like that. What Houston is to me right now feels like just a big lump of clay. There's so much athleticism there and so much length and so much quick twitch with Amen Thompson and Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. and Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason. There's Alperen Şengün was such a find. Sort of continued to evolve as they put the ball in his hands more. You still have Usman Garuba there. They're like they've drafted so many dudes over the last few years. They're so young and there's so much potential in it. And now it falls to Ime Udoka. And, if they're able to get a veteran point guard somewhere along the line or another veteran sort of calming presence somewhere along the line to help shape that clay into something special, the raw ingredients are there, I think. And Cam Whitmore certainly could be a massive part of that. So it's a tough night for him and a tough night financially, as you mentioned. But the hope is that context, the development of the context around him allows for this to be like the start of a much better story rather than a down note in sort of a negative, more of a falling action decline. So but you're right. It's the other side of all the positive emotion and all the sweet swelling stories. Every once in a while, somebody's not going to get that, and but it kind of doesn't matter how you get into the dance, just like what you do when you get in the door. So hopefully Cam Whitmore is going to be able to make up for that lost time and that lost value.
Yeah, I think one last loser is all of us and anyone else who is
I thought you were just going to
potentially
stop.
frustrated. Yeah.
All of
Who
us
is-
fucking losers.
Anyone who's potentially fatigued by the will he won't he of the Damian Lillard trade request, I can guarantee you now that Portland has not made any trades after the draft, during the draft, to bring in established
advance of
veteran
the draft.
talent.
Just no trades.
We are going to be hearing plenty of talk about that, which is why we will leave that topic for future episodes of No Cap Room here on the Ball Don't Lie Podcast Network. That will do it for us here this morning. I hope you guys are listening to this sometime this afternoon and you are not total sickos and move on with your weekend and get out of the NBA bubble like I plan to do. Thanks to John Gennaro for doing all the things he does to make this show look and sound great and wake up super early on the West Coast. I appreciate you for doing that. Please follow us on Twitter at Jake L. Fisher, at Your Man Devine. Subscribe to the Ball Don't Lie podcast feed on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening to, and leave us a 5-star review. That'd be great. The Good Word with Goodwill podcast with our guy, Vinny Goodwill. We'll be back on Monday with Kristen Peak for an even more in-depth look back at this 2023 NBA draft class, and they will be real sickos and look ahead to the 24 draft class. As you know, I can't even wrap my head around the free agency stuff I got to deal with next week.
Let alone thinking a full 12 months in advance.
But that's what we got to do. All right, that's it. We appreciate you. I appreciate you, Dan Devine. We'd appreciate it if all of our listeners came back and joined us next time for another edition of No Cap Room.
Go to sleep.